Okay, there is this secret I want to share with you, one that big tech doesn't want you to know. So pay attention. Programming is free. Okay? Okay, so let me tell you this story. There was a college student on his spring break who contacted me for a meeting. And at the time I had my own startup, I was bouncing between Y Combinator and getting some publicity on TechCrunch. And this student had followed my journey and, he wanted to get some insight for his own project that he was working on. So we met at this cafe and he went straight to business. He opened his brand new MacBook Pro, and I glimpsed at the website that he and his partner had created. It was a marketplace for students. Basically, you could sell your stuff to other students in your dorm. So I figured that this was a real problem he had experienced and wanted to solve. But after his presentation, I only had one question in mind about a piece of information that he casually dropped and moved on without really missing a beat. So he said he was paying around $200 a month for a website that had little to no functionality and it was extremely slow. In fact, it was so slow that he reassured me that the performance problems would disappear once they upgraded to the next tier. So, meaning they'll be paying much more. So, let's recap. MacBook Pro, slow website, expensive hosting, and zero functionality. Okay, let's back up a minute for a second. When I was getting started, I bought a laptop for $60. It was a defective PowerBook G4 that was on its way to the landfill. On that computer, I downloaded BB Edit, I installed MAMP, and in little to no time, I had clients on Craigslist. And that laptop paid for itself at least 500 times over. Then, a few years later, a friend gave me her old laptop. It was a Dell Inspiron E1505. That one paved the way to a professional career that landed me jobs in Fortune 10 companies. I'm not telling you this just to sound like an old man that says, back in my days, we used to compute with sticks and a dice, whatever. No, I say it because I owe it all not just to cheap devices I use to propel my career and make a living, but also because the tools that were available were free. So to this day, my go-to IDE is Vim. My language was PHP back then, a language that ran on almost every server that was available. The web hosting cost was less than a pizza, and my cloud was just a folder on that server. My AI pair programming that everybody used these days was just like the search engine and, hoping that someone had asked a question similar to the issue that I'm having, and then, digging through some forums, I would find the answer. Stack Overflow didn't exist yet. The only barrier of entry was the desire to learn. Fast forward today, and every beginner is buying equipment that can simulate the entire universe. Before they even start with their very first line of code, they have a subscription to multiple paid services. It's not because the free tools have vanished, but because the entire narrative around how to get started is now dominated by paid tools. Chances are, if you are just getting started with programming, then your gatekeeper is the influencer. When people get started with programming today, the first question is, which tool do I need to buy? The tools I used to launch my career are considered outdated for some reason. Things like LAMP, which is Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. All this is out the window, even though it's not really. But today, beginner starts with AWS. Some people even get a whole certification before they even start with a single line of code. Every class is selling you on the cloud. It's AWS, it's Vercel, it's a dozen other platforms with complex pricing models designed for scale, not for someone building their very first Hello World app. If you want to build something modern today, then you probably need an API key, and you will need to get that through Amazon or AWS, and you'll have to pay for that. You probably need to pay for a database separately, and then the hosting which will cost you whatever they charge by the request. They even offer code editors that are SaaS products with a subscription. You don't need any of that. I know it's not trendy to say this today, but I'll say it anyway. You don't need any of those paid tools to get started learning, especially not for your first project. All the tools are there and they're free. You have Git, you have VS Code, you have Python, JavaScript, Node.js, and a million of static site generators. All these are completely free. And it's not an accident that you don't gravitate towards those free tools. Other than Bootcamp selling new programmers on the idea of paid tools, the main culprit is how we learn. It's the attention economy. As a beginner programmer, you probably feel lost. And when I was new and lost, I would read documentation. I would read it until my eyes bled. It didn't matter. It was slow and annoying, but it was the only way to go. It was something active. You engaged with the code. You were wrestling with it line by line until you understood what was going on. But for the beginner programmer, when you're lost, the only thing you can do is go on YouTube, or at least that's the option that's presented to you. And on YouTube, the medium is the message. I'm often asked which YouTuber I recommend for learning. And before I answer, they almost always have someone in mind. They will tell me it's like this person, someone that I never heard of. And they say that he's really good. But then I wonder, why are you asking me this question if you already have an answer? And usually they're right. That YouTuber is great. He is very charismatic. He breaks down complex topics and he makes it look very easy. And in between, they promote Hostinger or whichever paid tools that comes with that are sponsoring that particular video. But I repeat, the medium is the message. And on YouTube, the message is passive consumption, not learning. Here's what happens when you are on YouTube. You find this very nice course, you watch a video, you nod along, and it feels like you are understanding. And then the video ends. What do you do next? Well, YouTube recommends the most interesting video that follows, whether it's a tutorial or something else. And you watch that, and then you watch the next one, and then the next one. And then the next thing you know, you've watched a whole bunch of videos and you never actually practiced what you're learning. You watched a whole bunch of videos and it feels like you learned a whole bunch of things, but you never actually practiced what you learned. But you were entertained. It feels a lot like binge watching a show on Netflix, and after you're done, you kind of like have a vague memory of the details of the entire show. Now, instead of just paying with money for the tools that they recommend you, you're also paying with your time and your focus, because you are trading the time, focus, and the frustration that comes from doing the essential work of building, of learning. You are trading that for the shallow, easy dopamine hit of watching someone else build. The influencer's goal is to keep you watching. The platform's goal is to keep you engaged. Your goal should be to stop scrolling and start typing. You have to practice your craft. And all these goals, they are at odds. So that student that came to visit me, I told him he was paying a high cost for his hobby project. A website with a total of 20 products and images shouldn't cost them more than $30. That's a Shopify subscription, at least if your focus is just the business part of things. But if you are a little more daring and want to do the work yourself, a $5 VPS is a great start. You can install MySQL, Rails, Postgres, PHP, Python, Node, or whatever you want on your server. If your project gains popularity, then you can think about scaling, and scaling isn't such a difficult task. If your project fails, then it is just a drop in the bucket. His story stuck with me because it wasn't unique. It's the new default path. Spend first, learn second. But it doesn't have to be this way. You don't need an AI subscription. You don't need a famous YouTuber. You need none of that to get started. What you really need is a text editor, which is free, a language runtime, which is also free, and a problem to solve. I'm sure you can come up with that. You need to get bored enough to start tinkering. The best thing you can do for yourself isn't to get a $20 a month AI tool or watch a bunch of tutorials. The actual best thing you can do is to give yourself the time and space needed to sit down and just stare at that blinking cursor and in cryptic error message on the screen and figure it out yourself. Remember, this is a problem-solving field. That's how you learn. My $60 defective laptop, it launched my career. That student paid $200 a month for God knows how many months, and it ended up going nowhere. The only difference between us was that he was told that he needed to pay in order to play. The tools for learning are free, and they will remain free forever. Don't let anybody convince you otherwise. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.